with me today is Joseph Aroni. He's the founder of Sweetleaf Collective. Joe, thank you so much for speaking with me this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your first time finding cannabis or hemp? Do you remember the first time you ever smoked weed? What was that like?
Yes. I was in high school in California, and me and some friends who had never tried cannabis, we wanted to try it. So we scored some off of the street. And, this is like early 90s in Northern California. So we were lucky. We got, really good cannabis straight off. And, we made a little can pipe, and it was some creeper bud. So we smoked it and we weren't super high yet. And then we went into this supermarket and we were just walking up and down the aisles and we didn't really know what we were doing. And then we got the munchies.
So were you that group of guy friends in California that used to meet at 420 every day, and that's how 420 got its name or its reputation?
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember in high school on April 20th at 420, we would be smoking weed and like watching the movie Dazed and Confused. And that was like the peak. We're like, it's 420 on 420, we're getting high, and we're watching Dazed and Confused.
And you've been in love with Mary Jane ever since.
It's amazing. It really helps save lives. And I've seen that firsthand. A lot of our patients, when we've done deliveries in the past, they've been in tears. And through their tears, they tell us that if we had not been providing them with free cannabis, that they would have already passed on. And so, yeah, so cannabis it's something real special.
Tell us a little bit about Sweetleaf Collective. This is a nonprofit organization. Tell us a little bit about how you basically got started. Where did the idea come from, and where are you guys now?
So I started the project in 1996. And at that time, I was a punk rock activist in San Francisco, and I was a part of a group called Food Not Bombs. And what Food Not Bombs did is they took food from supermarkets that were no longer commercially viable. Consumers wouldn't purchase it, but the food was still good. It hadn't gone bad yet, but it would go bad in a few days. So what we did is we picked up the food, we cooked it that day, and then that evening we went out and fed homeless people. And so that I really liked that concept. So when medical marijuana was passed with Proposition 215 in 1996, I thought to myself, why don't we do Food Not Bombs for cannabis? And, it's a really simple idea. You take surplus from an industry that is no longer commercially viable, and you get it to those who need it most. And it seemed even more impactful for me than Food Not Bombs. Food Not Bombs was really great because we were helping people with food. But with the cannabis, we focused on low income terminally ill people. And so these are people that could not afford the cannabis. And if they did not have the cannabis, they could die. And so the impact was really big. And, we started small. We started out with like 5 patients, and we were giving them a half an ounce of leaf every month. And we have ramped that up over the years, especially with the price of cannabis coming down. We saw our donations, the quality go up. And so what we're at right now is our patients receive 2 ounces of flour every month, as well as a bunch of edibles and concentrates. And yeah, we've really been able to ramp up the amount of cannabis we can provide to these people because, it's saving their lives. They need as much of it as possible.
Have you seen over your time doing this, like any sort of, instant gratification is not the correct term, but, instant results, or have you seen like a change in people's lives as you've been doing this?
Yeah, so we have a number of stories of how impactful it's been with people. And one of the ones I really like is we had a patient who came to us with really bad wasting syndrome. So our patients are primarily HIV/AIDS patients in San Francisco, and we also take care of cancer patients, and we also have a few patients that have both AIDS and cancer. And so this patient had AIDS and he was dying of wasting syndrome. He at that time looked, like similar to people you see in the pictures from Auschwitz. He was a walking skeleton. He did not have enough energy to work. He had to quit his job. When he was walking around the streets to like go get food, people would stop in the streets and stare at him because he looked like he was about to die. They were on $3,000 of pharmaceuticals a month, and it was not helping their appetite at all. And they were wasting away. So we brought them cannabis, and a month later, when we visited the same patient, he had put on 30 pounds. He was getting ready to go back to work to become a functioning member of society again. And he said that his doctor, when he saw his doctor, that the doctor was amazed and couldn't believe it. And the doctor told him, look, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it because it's working. And, just looking at that, looking at the healing capacity of this plant as compared to pharmaceuticals, we get into the whole story about our endocannabinoid system and that our body thrives on cannabinoids much better than pharmaceuticals. And it's a natural way of healing. And we see these results, and they're dramatic.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, cannabis has a long-standing history with, HIV patients and AIDS patients and those with so many other ailments. And it really is a great crutch to lean on in a time of need. What kind of pushback have you experienced in your mission to provide medicine to the sick, or just even establishing the collective or getting established in the cannabis industry? Have you received any pushback, or are you fighting any stigmas along the way?
Not so much. We're really lucky. The project is based in San Francisco, and San Francisco was the first municipality to pass medical cannabis laws. Santa Cruz came after that. And so San Francisco had medical cannabis for 3 or 4 years before Proposition 215. Before the whole state had medical cannabis, San Francisco already had it. So, we're looking at almost 30 years of medical cannabis in San Francisco. So it's a lot more socially acceptable. People understand more that it's medicine. And the only real issue that we have had in the 25 years that we've been doing this is when Proposition 64 was passed. So when Proposition 64 was passed, they did not make a distinction between commercial and non-commercial cannabis. They did not invite anyone from the nonprofit sector to the table to help craft that law. So when that law got implemented, medical compassionate cannabis was taxed. So we actually had to do fundraisers to raise money to pay the taxes so that we could give away free cannabis to terminally ill people. That was really difficult. And what we did in response to that is the compassion community came together. Now, pre-Proposition 64, there was a bunch of compassion projects, but we didn't really know about each other. We just took care of our little niche, For example, Sweetleaf, I didn't do any interviews for like 20 years. For me, it wasn't about recognition. It was about the patients. And the only reason I kind of started doing interviews was because of this issue with Proposition 64. And I needed to bring attention and bring light to the nonprofit sector of our industry. Now, a lot of people don't realize that there is a nonprofit sector, and that's why it's so important for us to get out there. A lot of people associate alcohol with cannabis, and alcohol doesn't have medical value. And the average citizen thinks that all cannabis is just recreational and that medical is kind of a joke. So, we're out there educating people. So, going back to Proposition 64, when it was implemented in 2018, we all started to come together as the nonprofit sector of our industry. We all started networking. We got in touch with Senator Weiner from San Francisco, and we got a bill into Sacramento. It was called SB 829, and it passed through the state House and the state Senate with an almost 90% yes vote. And that's due in large part to the Veterans Compassion programs that flipped almost all of the Republicans who were going to vote no on this bill. They voted yes because the veterans changed their way of thinking. They said, this isn't about Republicans voting no on cannabis. This is about Republicans voting yes for veterans. And it was incredible. They flipped it. It got to the governor's desk, and Jerry Brown didn't really understand, I think, what the bill was about. So he vetoed it. So we did the same bill the next year. It was called SB 34. And that year we actually got the name changed. Now it's the Brownie Mary and Dennis Perone Compassion Act, because those are the two originators of compassionate cannabis in the 80s in San Francisco in the AIDS community. And so we were able to get their names permanently attached to compassion. And Dennis Perone is also one of the people who wrote Proposition 215 and is a very key figure in the changing views of cannabis. And he's done so much, or he had done so much. He did pass 2 years ago. And so we did SB 34, second year, same legislation, but a new governor. So this time, Governor Newsom signed the bill. It went into effect the beginning of March of 2020 and successfully eliminated all taxes to compassionate cannabis. Now, this is a milestone. This is huge because this is the first time ever that a governmental body as large as the state of California has recognized the nonprofit sector of our industry. And what's great is when this was all going down, we started doing research on other states that had legalized recreationally before California. So we looked at Colorado, Oregon, and Washington, and we said, what happened with compassion there? Like, how did those compassion programs, transform through legalization? Like, what did they do? Maybe we can learn something. Well, what we learned is that all of those compassion programs basically shut down. And that was tragic. It's tragic. I mean, a lot of people died because they no longer had access to this medicine that was keeping them alive, and they couldn't afford it. And we saw that also in California in 2018, where some compassion groups weren't able to raise funds to pay for the taxes, and their cancer patients wound up passing on. And it's really tragic. And so now fast forward, we are in 2021 and the federal government is talking about legalization. And because of what we have done in California, it's having ripple effects around the whole country, which will in turn have ripple effects around the whole world. Now, compassion programs are in discussion with US senators and US assembly people in Washington, D.C. in regards to the coming legalization and incorporating the nonprofits into this. Currently, if you're a compassion program and you're actually touching the cannabis, you're not legally allowed to be a nonprofit. Now, we can be a nonprofit because we no longer touch cannabis. We are a patient organization. We organize patients. They're Sweetleaf patients. Last year, we helped our patients through the regulated supply chain receive over $500,000 worth of free cannabis. But we're just organizing the patients and basically instructing them on how they can receive this. We're not actually providing it anymore, which makes it so we can be a nonprofit. And and this is big. When we looked around and compassion had disappeared in these other regulated states, um, that scared us. And California has a long history of cannabis activism. And I feel really lucky that I'm here because we all came together and we fought this for years and we won.
Thank you for sharing all of that. There's so many different facets in the cannabis industry, whether it comes from terminally ill patients or, social equity and making sure everyone has fair representation at the table. What do things like social equity, what does that mean to you? We know what the term social equity means, but what does it mean to you? It means something different to everyone.
It does. It's interesting. I am an approved equity applicant in San Francisco, so I'm part of the equity program. I feel like equity and compassion come together, but they come together in different ways. Equity is great because it is elevating people who have historically been overlooked, who historically have been taken advantage of, and it helps get individuals into positions of power and get them into positions where they're business owners and help to start create generational wealth within those communities. That's really important. The thing I think though with compassion is that what equity is for the individual, compassion is for the community. So equity is great, but there's only so many CEOs you can make with social equity. Now the thing with compassion is that there's millions of people out there that qualify for compassion. They're low income, they can't afford this medicine. And so I feel like compassion is great because it is really focusing on the communities, and these are all underserved communities. Most of our patients are either POC or they're LGBT, or what's most often the case is they're both. And these are people that have been marginalized, and we need to help them. And so generational wealth and creating wealth for underserved communities is really great. But my personal perspective with my history of activism is, I think there's a lot more impact happening with compassion in regards um, to easing human suffering. Like that's one of my big philosophies is I'm really trying to ease human suffering, and social equity eases human suffering on an individual level, whereas compassion is easing human suffering on a much larger, broader community level. And yeah, and that's why we got to do what we do. We got to be out there. We got to be talking about compassion because everybody, like, social equity has been a buzzword, and that is so great. We really need to drive attention towards this issue, but we also need to include compassion in that. When we were going to the BCC meetings, there was a line whenever we were talking about social equity, and I was trying to bring in the fact that compassion is a part of that. What we're talking about is underserved communities and how to help them. And I understand it too. There's a lot more incentive for an individual to be like, hey, I want to make $1 million, as opposed to, hey, I want to help out all the people on my block, get some free weed. And so yeah, so compassion is definitely more dynamic, and is a part of that equity. It's helping underserved communities. It's providing relief, which is major.
Absolutely. 100% agree. And that really ties into, our current legal system. And you mentioned the federal government uh, potentially moving the needle here shortly? We have a new administration in the White House. Things are looking brighter. I'm seeing a green light at the end of the tunnel. What's your standpoint on the current legal system, and what does restorative justice look like to you?
Well, definitely, we have a much more open administration now that's into dialogues and trying to solve problems. So I think, we could see some good things happening in the next 4 years. Restorative justice, um, that is a big question. And it's super complicated. One of the things that Sweetleaf has been starting to do is we have an informal thing that we're calling Team Compassion. And so we are getting large donations of cannabis products that are very close to expiration. And we have become a compassion distributor. So, for example, Olo and Kinslips donated 6,000 units to us. It had a retail value of around $200,000. They donated that to us in January. It was going to be expiring in March. And so we got that out to 5 different compassion programs, and they were all able to go through it. And so we're starting to see different groups taking over different roles of the supply chain. And so this rolls into one of the compassion programs that's a newer one that I'd like to mention in regards to restorative justice. So this group is called Black Canna Joy. Check them out on Instagram. I recommend following them. They are a group in Oakland that has a completely new take on compassion, and I love it. And I love supporting them. And their premise is that all low-income POC people are all entitled to compassionate cannabis due to post-traumatic stress disorder from systemic racism and over-policing. And this is a mind-blowing concept. There's like millions of POCs in this country qualify for free compassionate cannabis. And this is a group in Oakland, and they're giving out free compassion to low-income POCs. And I have had a number of meetings with them, and I was like, hey, I want to be an ally. I don't want to tell you guys how to do anything. I think what you guys are doing is great. Like the community needs this. All I want to do is I want to help source donations for you. Can I do that? Can I just give you guys a bunch of free weed? Is that cool? And they're doing it. And we're actually in talks now because, they started, I don't know, sometime in the last year. And, this is growing out of the BLM protests, and bringing more attention to systemic racism and drawing compassion into this. So we're in talks now about trying to get them a chapter down in Los Angeles. And I'm trying to help them with the organization of that. And on top of that, I told them, I'm like, I'm getting a lot more donations. So if you open another chapter, I'll be able to supply that chapter as well. No problem. And that's what I see for restorative justice. Social equity is great. It's great to make more POC CEOs. But what I like is seeing these underserved communities organizing themselves for their own community. Like the POC CEO is great. They're providing jobs. But Black Canna Joy, what they are doing for their community, I think is much, much more impactful and is really helping out individuals in a big way. And that's why I'm so excited about them. I'm like, man, I just want to support y'all. Like, keep up the good work. We're all in this together.
Thank you so much, from us out there, to you. Thank you and Sweetleaf Collective for your mission and your dedication and your loyalty and passion to the industry. Thank you so much. For people that want to work with you, maybe they want to be involved in the collective, maybe they've got cannabis they want to donate, how can people find you? How can they reach out to you and connect?
So You can connect with us through our website, sweetleafcollective.org. We've been having some Instagram issues. They disappeared our account, unfortunately. I am on Clubhouse, Sweetleaf Joe. You can find me there. Um, and some other things that we're doing right now is we're doing fundraising in multiple ways. So we are fiscally sponsored as a nonprofit. If people want to give us monetary donations, we can give them a tax deduction. We also have compassion products in California at select dispensaries, and they're lighters and papers, and they cost $3 each. For every one sold, it pays for the overhead to get 3.5 grams of compassion to a compassion patient. So we've quantified compassion for the consumer and helping them get involved. Now, finally, what we have is something really exciting is we're working with Green Unicorn Farms, and they have helped us start a brand called Altruism. And there are 3 items on Green Unicorn Farms website that are altruism items. All profits from the sale of that CBD flower, which is really great. It's super high terpenes, super flavorful, and all of those profits are all going to Sweetleaf. And so there's a number of ways people can support. We're always looking for more donors. If you're a compassion project and you're looking for more donations, hit me up if you're in California.
Yeah, and I look forward to seeing that service, in LA and throughout the Bay Area, and like I said, hopefully in New York someday soon. You never know. Anything is possible. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your story with us. I look forward to sharing it with our audience. I think they're going to love to hear all about it, especially for those in the Bay Area. Get ready for Sweetleaf Collective.